Good morning, everyone. We are glad to have everybody back in the building with us after a week off. My name is Drew Gardner here at the two Mississippi Museums, and we're glad to have this week's History is Lunch program back in the Craig H. Neilsen Auditorium. I'm here in the Museum of Mississippi History and the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. As always, we are streaming live on Facebook and YouTube, where you can watch any of those previous History is Lunch conversations anytime. I hope that you'll consider joining us next week on Thursday, April 24th, for History Happy Hour. This is a free event with live music, food, and a cash bar. Guests will also be able to join interactive tours celebrating the life and legacy of B.B. King. This year, 2025, is not only what would have been the 100th birthday of Medgar Evers, but also the 100th birthday of B.B. King. And so we're excited for that event. And then I hope you'll join us again next week for History's Lunch with Marion Gerard Barnwell in conversation with Libby Hartfield, where they will be exploring Barnwell's latest work, All the Things We Didn't Say, two memoirs, a poignant and introspective dual memoir telling the story of their lives in Mississippi. But today we're excited to welcome Ann Marshall. Marshall is the executive director of the U.S. Grant Association and the executive director of the U.S. Ulysses S. Grant Presidential Library at Mississippi State University. Ann is an associate professor of history at Mississippi State, where she's taught since 2006. Marshall is the author of Creating a Confederate Kentucky, The Lost Cause and Civil War Memory in a Border State, and the upcoming book to be published, Cassius Marcellus Clay, The Life of an Anti-Slavery Slaveholder and the Paradox of American Reform. Again, that book will be published in the fall of 2025. She's also authored a number of articles articles that have appeared in journals like the Journal of the Civil War Era and Slavery and Abolition. She received her BA in History at Centre College of Kentucky and her MA and PhD in History at the University of Georgia. As a native of Lexington, Kentucky, Marshall now lives in Starkville, Mississippi, with her husband, two teenagers, and one spoiled dog. Please welcome Ann Marshall.
Well, thank you all so much for coming out in person and online. I am really grateful to have the opportunity today to talk with you about the Ulysses S. Grant Presidential Library and Museum, about what we're doing now and our plans for future growth. So we've had the Grant Association and the Grant Collection on Mississippi State's campus since 2009. And this is a collection of items that includes a copy of every known letter written to or from Ulysses S. Grant, as well as thousands of books and Grant-related artifacts. It comprises the most comprehensive collection of Grant-related research material in the world. The first question we often get when visitors come to see us is how in the world the most comprehensive collection, the most definitive collection of Grant correspondence and artifacts made its way to Starkville, as well as how did a museum that's dedicated to commemorating Grant's accomplishments as a general and a president end up in such a southern place? After all, Grant was the man who saved the Union. Let me see if I can get this working again. Turned off again, I think. Either that or it's frozen. Does anybody? It's going to be really boring if you just have to hear me talk and no pictures. So I'm going to pause for a second and let them fix this. Oh, there it goes. I don't know how that happened. But okay, so yes, here we are, Siege of Vicksburg. Grant was the man who saved the Union, while, of course, Mississippi was one of the first states to secede from it. And Grant's most definitive and brilliant military victory came in Mississippi with the capture of Vicksburg in 1863. He had a large hand in several other Union victories here in Mississippi as well, including Corinth, Jackson, and Raymond, among others. And then there's after the war. After the war, Grant was largely responsible for enforcing the policies which helped to crush the Ku Klux Klan in Mississippi and for extending a sustained federal military presence in the state to enforce Reconstruction amendments. So, given all of this, the surprise that Grant's Library and Museum is in our state is really surprising. So, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how the collection got here and what we're doing with it today. So the collection that is in Starkville now started off really as the project of one man, a historian named John Y. Simon, who was a history professor at Southern Illinois University at Carbondale for most of his career. And while he was there, he started and almost completed the edited papers of Ulysses S. Grant project. There are currently 32 of those volumes, and Simon really spearheaded the production of 31 of them while he was at Southern Illinois. So it was in the interest of compiling this edited collection that Simon collected all of these copies of correspondence to and from Grant. And while these were housed at Southern Illinois, they actually really functioned as more of a private collection. Really, you needed Simon's permission if you wanted to access them. It wasn't a sort of open door access policy like most archives run by like the Mississippi Department of Archives and History or Mississippi State University, for example. Well, when John Simon retired, the university didn't want to support the collection any longer. And so the responsibility to rehome it was given to the U.S. Grant Association. And that's where my predecessor, Dr. John Marzalek, stepped in. So many of you may be familiar with Dr. Marzalek. He, at the time, was a retired history professor from Mississippi State, where he taught for over 25 years, and he's written extensively about the Civil War, especially on military history. He was also serving in my role at the time as the executive director of the Grant Association, and he believed that Mississippi State would be a great place to house the collection. So he approached the then incoming MSU president, Mark Keenum, and asked if this was something that he'd be interested in supporting, and Dr. Keenum jumped at the opportunity. Dr. Keenum is a native of Corinth, and so he, of all people, knows Grant's impact in the state during the Civil War. But he also believed that even though Mississippi seemed like an unlikely home for the collection, that it was in a way a very fitting one. And this is how he describes it. And you have to believe it seems a little tongue-in-cheek, but he is very earnest when he says this. He says, "There is not another state in the nation that had more to do with propelling Grant's career than the state of Mississippi. It was Grant's success here in Mississippi that earned him the special gratitude of President Lincoln and propelled him into a much larger and grander role in leading the Army during the war. Afterwards, with his celebrity, it propelled him into being President of the United States. It is most appropriate and fitting for his library to be located in the great state of Mississippi." And to further underscore the appropriateness, President Keenum likes to invoke one of Lincoln's most famous orders that he gave Grant. This was in the August of 1864 during the Overland Campaign, when Grant was commanding the Army of the Potomac in Virginia, and things were not going well for the Union during this time. They had been laying siege to the town of Petersburg for months, losing men left and right. But Grant was tenaciously dug in. He was intent on pushing forward, even with casualties mounting, holding tight where previous Union commanders had retreated. So Lincoln wrote him a telegram saying, "I have seen your dispatch expressing your unwillingness to break your hold where you are. Neither am I willing. Hold on with a bulldog grip and chew and choke as much as possible." So Lincoln was not the first person to compare Grant to a bulldog. This is just one of dozens of political cartoons and military cartoons that were out during the time period that compared Grant to a bulldog, because he really was tenacious, would not give up, especially in comparison to previous Union commanders, including the one that is standing to Lincoln's right here, which is General George McClellan, Little Mac as he was known, who was famously hesitant during the early years of the war to be aggressive, and that ended up costing him his job. Lincoln finally fired him. But yes, Grant is very much considered to be a bulldog, and so this just seemed like it was meant to be to a lot of folks from Mississippi State. So the Grant collection moved to Mississippi State in 2009, and at the time it was housed on the bottom floor of the Mississippi State Library. I like this picture because you can see we had a number of nice items in this little glass room, but it was located next to technical services, which, while it is a integral part of our library's operation, was not exactly prime real estate for a presidential collection. But over this time period, MSU's commitment to Grant grew. In 2012, our collection and the facility in which it sits was designated a presidential library, which made MSU one of only 6 universities in the country to actually hold a presidential library. And shortly afterwards, the university began a major building project, cost $10 million in all, to add a facility to the 4th floor, which was a roof. The roof of the 3rd floor became our library that we're currently in. And we now have a 21,000 square foot facility that does have this largest collection of Grant's papers and artifacts in the world. We've got 15,000 linear feet of correspondence, research notes, artifacts, photographs, along with thousands of books. So even though most of the originals of these items are in archives and of other libraries across the country, you can imagine, if you were a researcher, how convenient it would be if all of these materials are in one place. And our latest landmark moment in the life of this collection actually came just about a month ago, when, as an acknowledgement of the tremendous commitment that MSU has made to housing and showcasing the Grant collection, the Grant Association signed an agreement that transferred permanent ownership of the collection to Mississippi State. And this was really a big deal because this association has acted as the custodian of this amazing collection for over 50 years. And so it was a big deal for the board and many of the members to cede control of this, right, to another institution. But they really put their trust in Mississippi State because of everything that the university has done to support it. And our collection over the years has really aided quite a few Grant researchers, everyone from PhD students to famous authors. Probably the most famous is Ron Chernow, who came to Starkville several times for weeks at a time when he was researching his very hefty Grant biography. If anyone's read it, you'll know it's a doorstopper of a book, but it's really good. He came and hung out with us, and then he came back again to do a book signing, and I love this picture because, I am a history professor, so anytime I see college students reading for fun, it is it's great. So, and then you can see in the back, there's another woman in the back that's got her copy of Ron Chernow's Hamilton for him to sign. That was right in the middle of the Hamilton heyday. So. We've had other well-known authors as well. Ron White wrote another great biography of Grant that came out around the same time as Chernow's did. Brett Baer has written a Grant book. He came to our facility as well. In 2020, we helped the production team from the History Channel that produced the Grant miniseries. We collected items for them. We found, fielded research questions, helped them locate photographs, other things that they used in the production. And in addition to providing resources to other scholars, the library is also dedicated to producing our own publications about Grant. In 2017, Dr. Marzalek and fellow editors David Nolan and Louis Gallo published an edited and annotated version of Grant's memoirs with Harvard University Press. And if you're not familiar with them, Grant's memoirs are really remarkable. They're considered by many to be among the best presidential memoirs in U.S. history, even though the memoirs don't actually cover Grant's presidency. And one of the most acclaimed military memoirs in American history as well. And they are made all the more compelling because, as some of you may know, Grant wrote them in record haste as he was in agonizing pain. He was dying of throat cancer at the time, and he was under great pressure to finish the memoirs. Just because before he was diagnosed with cancer in 1884, he found out that the Wall Street financial scheme that he was involved in, you all will be surprised to know that a Wall Street financial scheme in the mid-1880s went belly up. And unfortunately, Grant lost all of his investment in it. He also had encouraged other people to invest in it as well. So he was on the hook for repaying over $150,000 to people. And so he knew he was dying. He had to repay all this money. And moreover, he was really afraid of leaving his beloved wife, Julia, destitute after he died. And so Mark Twain helped him to secure a very advantageous publishing contract. And so he wrote and wrote, oftentimes when he was in and out of, lucidity because he was in so much pain. And he finished the memoirs only 3 days before he passed away in 1885. We also published another much shorter volume called Hold On with a Bulldog Grip, because we just can't help ourselves at Mississippi State. We got to work that bulldog in everywhere. So it's a much smaller. If you want a readable introduction to Grant, this is the one for you. We published it with the University Press of Mississippi, and that was back in 2019. And I'm happy to say that our team is putting the finishing touches on Sherman's memoirs now, also led by a team including Dr. Marzalek, Louis Gallo, and David Nolan. These should be out in the fall, so if you're interested in those. Well, the most visible portion of our operation is our museum, which attracts thousands of visitors every year. It features state-of-the-art interactive exhibits that introduce visitors to Grant's life, his military achievements, his presidency, and his later life. We've got these life-size statues. This actually is how short Grant was when he went off to, I don't know if you can really tell the scale of this, but he was tiny when he went off to West Point as a 17-year-old. We also have a gallery in the museum that's dedicated to Lincoln items. These items come from a vast collection which was donated to the university by Judge Frank and Virginia Williams. Judge Williams was the former Chief Justice of the Rhode Island Supreme Court, and he was the president of the Grant Association when the Grant collection moved to Mississippi. And he was so impressed with what the university did for the collection, the welcome that the collection got in Mississippi, that he decided to donate his own collection, which at the time he donated it was the largest privately held collection of Lincoln items in the world. So we are so excited to have both these collections with us, and as you can imagine, they do attract visitors from everywhere. Currently, we have about just over 5,000 visitors come each year, and they come from all over the country, indeed from all over the world. We just had somebody from Greece in not too long ago. A couple weeks ago, someone from Scotland was in. So some of these people come to us as part of trips they're taking to go see other Civil War sites because we're kind of located between Shiloh and Vicksburg. Still, others come to us as part of their own quest to see every presidential library or center in the country, and we love having them. We love explaining the collection's unlikely road to Starkville. We love seeing their surprise at the way we tell Civil War history. As you might imagine, a lot of people don't think that Mississippians can tell truthful and painful history. And we know that's not true because we're sitting in this place with these two great museums that do a great job at that. But we love being part of the effort to do that in Mississippi. And we appreciate that many of these folks haven't ever been to Mississippi before. They wouldn't have come to Mississippi if it hadn't been to come to the Grant collection. So we're really delighted to act as a sort of front door for not just for the Mississippi State campus, but for all of Mississippi. We're also excited to be promoting Grant amid a general uptick in his in appreciation for him and for his accomplishments. In his own time, Grant was both lionized for both his accomplishments of saving the Union and for his presidency. By the time he died in 1885, he was the most famous living American. This is a picture of his funeral cortege wandering through New York City. It was 7 miles long, if you can imagine. But in Grant's lifetime, he was also heavily criticized. People called him a drunk. They criticized his military acumen. They said that he only won battles because he was lucky and because he had had more material and more men. And they criticized him for his willingness to supposedly to throw those men at Lee's armies. He was attacked for doing so heedlessly, they said. They called him a butcher. And he faced even more criticism in his presidency. His presidency was indeed plagued by a number of scandals, and people accused him of being a corrupt politician. And these are two cartoons from his presidency with very divergent takes. So the one on your left is a Thomas Nast cartoon. And you can see this is sort of a sympathetic take on Grant's problems. You can see that he's, hunched over, weighed down by the burdens of all kinds of issues of the day, both domestic and foreign. And instead of being the bulldog, you can see in the background that Grant is actually being hounded by dogs here. The cartoon on the right, not so sympathetic. Here you see Grant looking disheveled. He looks like he could possibly be inebriated, as a common theme of critics of Grant. And you can see he's wandering between these light posts, holding on to them. They're labeled first term, second term, and then he's headed towards one that's labeled third term. There was all kinds of rumors that Grant was going to try to run for a third term. Of course, this is well before the passage of the 22nd Amendment. There aren't term limits yet. He did not run for that third term. But historians over the last 2 decades have really rescued Grant from these kinds of allegations. They have shown that in battle he was not simply lucky, that he was a brilliant military strategist and tactician, and that they've emphasized that unlike many of the other Union generals who preceded him, he really did have the courage and resolve to keep pushing. They've also shown that while Grant did have some shortcomings as president, that he wasn't personally corrupt. If anything, he was too trusting of the people that were around him, maybe a poor judge of character. But more importantly, they have come to see his presidency in a more positive light because they've recognized Grant's commitment to enforcing the implementation of civil rights in the South, even when it was unpopular, not just amongst Southern whites, but Northern white voters as well. It was very politically risky of him to offer as much commitment as he did. And Grant's resolve in this was in no small part the reason that Reconstruction was even briefly successful in Mississippi and other Southern states. So thanks to the scholarship and biographies that have appeared in the last decade, the general public is coming around to this new appreciation of Ulysses S. Grant as well, and we are really excited to be part of this. There have been a couple of important indicators of this new goodwill towards Grant in the last few years, probably the greatest being his posthumous military promotion that was authorized at the end of 2022. He was promoted to the U.S. Army's highest rank as General of the Armies, plural, which only 2 other people before Grant had received that rank. One was John Pershing, and the other was George Washington, obviously also posthumously. So authorization for this promotion was introduced by Senators Sherrod Brown of Ohio, a Democrat, and Republican Senator Roy Blunt, as well as Republican Congressman Ann Wagner of Missouri. So in order to get this to happen, lawmakers from both sides of the aisle had to come together to get this into the 2023 military defense appropriation bill. So I think it says a lot in a day and age when Republicans and Democrats can't really agree on anything, that they can agree on Grant. And I think that most of you also know that we are in the process of building a much bigger freestanding Grant Presidential Library that will be just off of Mississippi State's campus. The team that MSU has hired to execute this is the same design partnership that's responsible for the World War II Museum in New Orleans. I know many of you have probably been there. And if you visited, you'll be aware of the immersive experience that it provides. And that is what we are aiming to do in our new building. We're also excited. I know no one gets excited about parking lots because, they're a blight on the earth, right? But we're pretty excited about getting our own parking lot because it can sometimes be a little tricky or at least intimidating to park on a university campus. And so we're excited to get that parking lot as well. We're also really looking forward to welcoming even more visitors. Our design firm conducted a feasibility study as part of their process and estimates that we may, after a couple of years, attract as many as 50,000 visitors a year, which would be a tenfold increase over what we are hosting now. So we're pretty excited about that because there'll be even more people coming to Starkville, coming to Mississippi, and to MSU. And another thing that I didn't even really realize until I stepped into this position a couple of years ago is the special and unique role that presidential libraries play in our country, and that they are more than just museums dedicated to the stories about the men that they represent, that they are places that promote civic education and citizenship. They celebrate national service, whether that's military service or voluntary service, And they promote voter education and participation. They are nonpartisan beacons of democracy. That you might be a little skeptical of that statement because what in the world could be nonpartisan today? But I promise you that's actually really true. Let me see if I can get this. It might have timed out on me again. Oh, there we go. Oh. Okay, sorry about that. Hopefully nobody's woozy after that. So this is actually a picture of a meeting I attended back in February where I was amidst all these people from different presidential libraries from across the country, from Reagan Library in California to the Kennedy Library in Massachusetts and everywhere in between. We represented presidents from George Washington, whose library we were based in at the time, all the way up to Barack Obama, and almost every president in between. And we were there not to talk about our particular presidents, but we were there to discuss civic education initiatives as well as plans for celebrating the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, which is next year. And I can tell you there's truly a shared mandate between our institutions. In fact, they refer to themselves as presidential cousins. And there's really a sense that our institutions have a commitment that is something much bigger than our individual presidencies. And with this in mind, I've come to realize that our efforts at our current facility, and as we're going into the process of building our new one, it's not just about giving Grant a structure that is appropriate for the outsized role that he has played in our nation's history. It's not just about building a monument to a superb Civil War general and a two-term president. It is really about the next step in fulfilling the role and responsibility that MSU took on when they called our facility a presidential library back in 2012. And I'm happy to say that we do have a great start on this. In 2022, we were fortunate enough to get a $26 million appropriation from Congress, thanks to the support of Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith. But as you can imagine, a project of this magnitude is going to cost a little bit more than that. So we are still in the fundraising phase at this point, but we're doing this happily because we know that this new library will not just be an investment in, in Grant, but it's going to be an investment in our country. It is an act of profound patriotism to host a presidential library on our campus. It is a commitment to the United States and our own unique form of government, fragile form of government at times, and it is a commitment not only to studying and commemorating our unique past, but also to shaping both our present as well as our future. So I hope that you will come visit us if you haven't already. If you have already come, please come visit us again because we do change out our exhibits. Grant has a relatively new exhibit that just opened around Christmas time, dedicated to a collection of John Rawlins, who was Grant's sort of right-hand man during his time in the Army and in the early part of his presidency. Lincoln just opened a new exhibit a couple of days ago on the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. So there's always something new going on in the museum. We are still currently located on the 4th floor of the Mitchell Memorial Library. We're open from 8 to 5 every weekday. We're open most Saturdays, though not on home football games and not during the summer. So just check the website before you decide to come on a Saturday. We're also free admission, so no reason not to come. And also we have, despite what I just said about needing a parking lot, it's actually not terribly hard to park on our campus. We've got great instructions that are on our website, and we have personalized assistance. So if you have trouble, even with those great instructions, you can always call the front desk and somebody will literally coach you through parking on campus. So please come and visit us. Thank you very much.
All right, we've got lots of times for questions.
Can you tell us a little bit about the library as a resource for people researching Mississippi topics, whether that's the war or Reconstruction or personal interest, contraband camps?
Yeah, so so we definitely have lots of items, especially if we're thinking about contraband camps, because during most of you, many of you may know this already, but during Grant's Vicksburg campaign, almost 100,000 enslaved Mississippians basically freed themselves with the help of the Union Army to some extent, right? So it's a huge moment in the history of emancipation in Mississippi because of the chaos of war. Even though there were emancipation efforts worked into military laws. You really needed and as well as the Emancipation Proclamation, you needed to have an army on the ground to help enforce the conditions that would allow that to take place. So all that to say, there are a lot of resources. One of the things I think it's important to point out is I did just highlight the 32 volumes of Grant's edited papers. But that sounds like a lot, and it is, but there are many, many, many more documents that could not be fit into that project. And so we have those as well. We call them creatively the unpublished files, but you can come and see those. And I would also like to shout out the Mississippi State University Special Collections, which is just on the floor below us. Also has an amazing Civil War collection if you're interested in the Mississippi Civil War story. So you could, basically research in the same facility these different collections. So, yeah.
Tell us about the relationship between Ulysses S. Grant and Stephen D. Lee, the first president of Mississippi State University.
Yeah, so as many of you know, they faced off against each other during the Vicksburg campaign. And what's probably most famous, they didn't really have a personal relationship, but Stephen D. Lee and Grant's son Fred worked together to create the Vicksburg Military Park. So they did sort of see this as the people at the time would have called it the sort of shaking hands across the bloody chasm, where this creation of the military park was this kind of, occasion of reunion between white Southerners and white Northerners. So yeah, Dr. Keenum also likes to bring Stephen D. Lee into the story as well, because he does like to underscore these connections that existed between Lee and especially with Fred Grant as well. So.
Thank you. This is a slightly different question, and it's okay if you don't feel qualified, or if you don't have an opinion, feel free. But and correct me if I'm wrong. But is it true to say that Grant did have slaves? Did Grant own slaves, or is it his wife who owned slaves? Mm-hmm. And secondly, Grant was in a position. This is a personal opinion, of course, but I think that Grant was in a position to change the field order, which recommended that ex-slaves especially those who had fought in the Civil War, to own 40 acres and a mule. And I would suggest that Grant was in a position to change that and to put that into effect. And I don't think he did. So I'm wondering if that is accurate. Thank you.
Yeah, so to the first question, yes, Grant was indeed an enslaver for a number of years of his life. He had a really interesting backstory in relationship to slavery. He was the son of an ardent abolitionist, and then he married well, I don't know how else to describe her except that she was she was from outside of St. Louis, Missouri. This was Julia Grant. She grew up on a plantation, not what we would think of as like a Mississippi plantation, but a small farm. She had grown up in a slaveholding household her entire life. And she had enslaved laborers that she inherited from her father. Grant as well did own a man named William Jones. He gets a lot of credit, especially if you've seen the Grant miniseries, for manumitting William Jones at the St. Louis courthouse. This was in 1859. We don't know what caused him to make that decision. People will point out that Grant was broke. I mean, he was not great with money. The 19th century Ponzi scheme falling apart before his death was just like one in a long string of bad financial moves by Grant. And so he was really broke. At the time, he was selling firewood on the street corners of St. Louis, and then he also ended up working in his brother's general store in Galena. But before he left St. Louis, he did manumit William Jones. We're not exactly sure why he did that. We also don't know what happened to William Jones. Many historians will point out that they wished William Jones had a less a less common name, because he's been really impossible to track down. So all this to say, Grant marries into the slaveholding family. He engages in the practice of slavery. And I point out that his father is an abolitionist because Grant was never an abolitionist. He turns into sort of an abolitionist as he is in the field in Mississippi during the Vicksburg campaign. But prior to that, he is not, he's not necessarily pro-slavery, but he doesn't get into the Civil War to end slavery, much like most white Northerners. But interestingly, during the Civil War, Julia still is, owns 4 human beings, and she will bring them. She goes to see Grant, as he's in the war, numerous places, and she's very careful to make sure that she keeps these enslaved individuals out of places where they might be free, right, where the Emancipation Proclamation applies. One of them, a woman named Jules, actually escapes, just leaves her, and Julia writes about this, and she's sort of surprised that, that this would happen. And so, he does have this really complicated, as he is fighting, this war becomes a war to end slavery. His wife is still, enslaving individuals. And of course, they're eventually emancipated during the course of the war. But it is a very interesting kind of, it's paradoxical in a lot of ways, although people at the time would not have seen it as uncommon, right? It was not unusual. To the point about the land redistribution, yes, Grant was like many people after the Civil War, where they were, Americans loved their property rights. And that's what, essentially meant that, slavery continued for so long as it did, right? And it took a war to end it because there was this constitutional right to hold enslaved property in many states in the United States. They also didn't want to take land, right, that had been legally owned by white Americans, whether they were decided to leave the Union and, essentially can commit treason or not. And so this is a very, what you're talking about is a very, it's a moment where, there was a moment in history where we could have certainly changed the basically the property regime, right, in a way that would have allowed freed men and women to actually gain some economic independence, which was really hard to do in the 19th century without land. And yeah, Grant was definitely one of those people that, land redistribution, which 40 acres and a mule represented, really was something that many Americans, however they felt about slavery, felt would have been a step too far. And I think we could put Grant in that category as well. So, yeah.
I have a question over here.
Oh, yes.
And it's sort of along the line of departmental. The question is, what is the current student population thinking about in your courses with Grant and the fragile state that we're in today that you used? How are you tying how Grant was reacting to that to the way that the president is doing it today?
Oh, wow. That was a really hard question. And yeah, may not have a job to go back to in Starkville if I answer it. So no, I'm kidding. But well, I'm gonna answer it this way. One of the things we always talk about as professors of history is that, we try to teach students how to analyze and think critically about the past using primary source documents. So documents that, were produced at the time that they're studying, so that we teach them how to think through these issues themselves. And so we like to say we don't teach them what to think, we try to teach them how to think. And I think I wouldn't deign to speak for all of my colleagues out, both at Mississippi State or in other, other history departments across the country, but I think that we understand that our mission hasn't changed, and that we don't have a particular agenda other than to encourage students to think critically and analytically. And by critically, I mean don't accept everything at face value. Not that we are we reflectively, I think I should say reflectively. So I don't know if that's evading your question, but that's where I'm going to leave that. So,
in any of the parts of your collections, do you have any unique documents that use names of enslaved or formerly enslaved Mississippians? And also, do you have a digitization program?
Oh, that's a great question. So yeah, so in our particular collection, it's not digitized. We do have, you can electronically access the edited papers of Grant. Would love to digitize the unpublished material. That will take a lot of time and resources, but that's kind of a dream project for us. But there's just so much of it that'll take a long time. Yes, there are definitely documents in our collection as well as in all the Civil War collections at Mississippi State that do mention enslaved and previously enslaved people by name. So,
what's going to happen to the space when you move out and go to the new building?
Well, I like to joke that people have been in measuring for new carpet and drapes and everything, but the truth is we don't really know. I hope they'll keep the gallery space we have lots of really cool museum oriented collections on our campus. So I'm hoping they'll at least keep that space for they'll keep the gallery space, but I'm not sure exactly what they're going to do. It could change 2 or 3 times before the time we actually get the new building. So.
Do you have a goodly amount of correspondence between Grant and Mark Twain in your collection?
There is some, yeah, there is. And that would, I mean, none of that correspondence is original. One of the things that happened, and one of the reasons we don't have more Grant artifacts, is that when Grant went bankrupt, William Vanderbilt came in and said, I'm going to help bail you out. At least give him the money to pay back the other investors. And so in exchange, Grant gave Vanderbilt a lot of his items, a lot of his military-oriented things, a lot of his papers. Then Twain and Julia Grant decided together to donate those to the Smithsonian. So the Smithsonian has a wonderful collection of Grant items. Of course, we wish we had them, but I'm glad they're in a good home. But yes, there is copies of correspondence between Grant and Twain, the originals being at the Smithsonian or some at the Library of Congress as well, I believe.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I know you are an expert in Civil War memory, how the Civil War has been remembered after the fact. How would you analyze this reinterpretation of Grant, both nationally, but specifically in Mississippi? There's something interesting about that.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. It's really interesting. I mean, historians have traced, especially, the Grant super fans have pointed out that really Grant's, this kind of negative interpretation of Grant. I mean, certainly there was some of this going on during the war that was sort of political, both political nationally, but also within the military politics. But what happens after the war is the sort of negative view of Grant, the diminishing of his military skills, really picks up with this burst of lost cause writing that that white Southerners are doing to really explain, how they got into the war, why they lost the war. This is the point at which, Robert E. Lee becomes sort of this marble man, so to speak. He becomes this sort of beau ideal of a soldier. And Grant is contrasted with Lee, right? Lee is supposed to be the gentleman. Grant is, the sort of disheveled everyman general who, couldn't even bother to put on clean clothes to go to, the surrender at Appomattox. Incidentally, he was also suffering from a migraine that day, so he had covered himself in mustard. So if you can imagine going to like the most important, moment of your career, and you're, wearing really old clothes and you smell like mustard, and you're, Lee, of course, was like perfectly attired in his clean uniform. So really there's a sense that in order to raise Lee up and explain why his soldiers failed, you have to kind of diminish Grant and diminish Grant's army. And so I think that's part of it, as well as people forget all the time. I always say Grant fought these 2 wars in Mississippi, one during the Civil War and one during Reconstruction. And of course, white Southerners are so bitter about this, right? I mean, we can see why they would have hated Grant during this time period. And so I think it's really a mix between historians talking about Grant's skills as a general, dealing with some of this stuff in terms of his alcohol usage. But the bigger thing is just that the historiography, as we would say as historians, the way that we remember the Civil War in general has changed, at least in academic literature, which I think is filtered down to the public as well. And we understand what the lost cause was, why people constructed it. We understand that it had a very particular political political purpose at the time it was created. And so as people are changing their understanding of Reconstruction in general, as it's being interpreted the way it is, in the two museums we're in now, that, as people are seeing Reconstruction as a positive effort rather than this era in which, white Southerners endured terrible times and were mistreated and there was federal overreach, then I think that puts what Grant did, and I don't want to give Grant all the credit. It was the people who were risking their life and limb on the ground in places like Mississippi that are the heroes of Reconstruction, right? But if Grant had not put the military resources and the legal resources of the federal government behind those people, their sacrifices would have been much more short-lived than they were. So,
Hi. You alluded to the skepticism of people trusting the South to tell the truth about history. My thoughts go to what's happening today with the efforts for DEI to either limit or eliminate information about people of color and Native Americans, and whether you can use that to help your students understand what it all means.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Even prior to the sort of fever pitch of our current political moment around history and history education, we've always seen, at the Grant Library, but other places like the Grant Library, right? I think we see our mission as, yes, absolutely letting those documents, the artifacts, and our contextualization of them tell that story, and that's, at least for the moment, not going anywhere. That story's not going anywhere. So, it hasn't, none of that's changed the way we are telling that story, if that makes sense.
Simple question. Where exactly will the new building be?
Oh, great question. That it will be on the corner of Highway 12 and Russell Street. So if you all are familiar with the Mill, which our alumni association has moved into now, which is on Russell Street, the old textile mill. There's an empty corner there that is sort of obscured because of a bunch of trees, but that's where we're going to be. So it'll be right across the entrance from the campus, but accessible. You'll be able to see the football stadium, so that really counts as on campus, right? But you'll be able to have parking. It's the best of both worlds. So.
This has been a really interesting presentation. I've really enjoyed it. I have a practical question that kind of connects to the lady's question that she asked earlier. Where does your funding come for the preservation of the artifacts, for the operation of the facility, for just the staffing?
Yeah, so back when the Papers Project started, there was a lot of federal funding involved for years. So the NHPRC, which helps to publish historical documents, and the NEH helped to fund that project for years. That funding ended with the Papers Project. So we haven't been on government funding other than, the appropriation that Senator Hyde-Smith, secured for us. Our day-to-day operations are supported by the university. So, yeah.
Maybe one last question. Years ago, I recall seeing a photograph in a historic hotel in West Virginia depicting meeting of Confederate generals with Northern generals. Do you know if Grant was there, and was it his idea to get everybody together?
I'm not sure what picture you're talking about, but I don't know that he would have been there, but I can't say for sure that he wasn't. So, and people used to just make those, they used to just draw sort of, fantasy, scenarios. So, but it's possible that he could have been there. So.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you guys for being here today. Let's give Ann Marshall one more round of applause.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
We hope that you'll join us again next week for Marion Gerard Barnwell and Libby Hartfield as they come to talk about Barnwell's latest book, All the Things We Didn't Say, 2 memoirs. Thank you guys again. Y'all have a great day.